in the vast humming corridors of the Orion Nexus space station, where the artificial gravity hummed like a distant lullaby and the stars outside the viewports whispered secrets of infinite worlds, Jake Morrison found his purpose in the mundane miracles of maintenance. He was a man of tools and circuits, his hands calloused from wrestling with the temperamental guts of life support systems and environmental regulators that kept this floating bastion of humanity and its alien allies alive amid the void. At 32, with a mop of unruly chestnut hair and eyes the color of storm-tossed oceans, Jake had left Earth behind 5 years ago, chasing the thrill of the unknown after a failed engagement that left him wary of emotional entanglements. The station was his sanctuary, a place where relationships were professional, fleeting, and uncomplicated. Or so he thought, until the day his routine repair call led him to Lab 7A, home to Dr. Kasara Kes-Telan, the brilliant Villani astrophysicist whose work unraveled the mysteries of black holes and quantum entanglement. Kes was a vision of otherworldly grace, her skin a shimmering mosaic of iridescent blues and silvers that shifted subtly with her moods, like the auroras of her homeworld, Velara Prime. Her ears, long and elegantly pointed, were the most expressive feature of her species, twitching, flattening, or perking up in ways that betrayed emotions with unerring honesty. At 28 Earth years, equivalent to her prime Villani adulthood, she had risen swiftly in the interstellar scientific community, her mind a vortex of calculations and theories that could predict stellar collapses light years away. But for all her intellectual prowess, Kes harbored a quiet vulnerability, a longing for connection that her logical, systematic Villani culture often dismissed as inefficient. She had arrived on the station 2 years prior, immersing herself in research to escape the rigid expectations of her family, who viewed emotions as variables to be controlled, not indulged. Her lab, a sanctuary of holographic displays and humming spectrometers, was her domain until the environmental controls began failing, drawing Jake into her orbit like a comet captured by a star's gravity. Their first encounter was unremarkable, a standard repair amid flickering lights and erratic temperature spikes. Jake arrived with his toolkit, expecting the usual curt nod from a preoccupied scientist. Instead, Kes greeted him with a warm smile, her ears perking slightly in curiosity. "Technician Morrison, thank you for coming so promptly," she said, her voice a melodic cadence with the faint trill of Villani phonetics. She offered him a seat while he worked, asking questions about his tools not out of obligation, but genuine interest. "How does this regulator compensate for microgravity fluctuations?" "Fascinating. It's like balancing equations in a chaotic system." Jake, surprised by her engagement, found himself explaining more than necessary, his guarded demeanor cracking under her attentive gaze. By the time he fixed the issue, they had shared a laugh over a shared frustration with bureaucratic supply chains, and she insisted on brewing him a cup of coffee from her personal synthesizer black, 2 sugars, as he offhandedly mentioned. The failures persisted, as if the station itself conspired to bring them together. Week after week, Jake returned to Lab 7A, each visit stretching longer than the last. What began as professional courtesy blossomed into easy camaraderie. Kes learned to anticipate his arrivals, preparing coffee exactly to his liking, a small gesture that warmed him more than the beverage itself. They talked of everything and nothing, her latest discoveries about wormhole stability, his stories of Earth's vast oceans and unpredictable weather. Jake marveled at her intellect, the way her eyes lit up like supernovas when she described cosmic phenomena. "You make the universe sound like a living thing," he once said, leaning against a console as she adjusted a holographic model. Kes's ears flushed a soft pink, a color he would later learn signified quiet pleasure. "It is alive in its way," she replied softly, her gaze lingering on him a moment too long. Unbeknownst to Jake, these interactions stirred something profound in her, affection that grew from admiration to longing. Her Villani heart, with its dual chambers beating in rhythmic harmony, now sinking to the cadence of his presence. For Kes, the feelings emerged gradually, like stars emerging from nebula dust. At first, she dismissed them as intellectual curiosity, a fascination with human resilience and humor. But as weeks turned to months, she found herself replaying their conversations in quiet moments, her ears twitching involuntarily at the memory of his laugh. Villani culture emphasized logical pairings, unions based on compatibility matrices and shared objectives, not the chaotic whirl of romance. Yet here she was, a scientist of precision, falling for a human technician whose world was one of improvisation and grit. She tried to suppress it, maintaining a facade of professional detachment, but her body betrayed her, ears perking at his approach, skin shimmering with unspoken warmth. 3 months in, she admitted to herself the truth. She was in love. Terrified of rejection or professional repercussions, she hid it behind layers of courtesy, her terrible poker face a constant battle against her expressive physiology. Jake, too, felt the pull, though he buried it deeper. After his heartbreak on Earth, he had vowed to keep things simple, no attachments in the stars. Kes was brilliant, beautiful, and kind, but she was also alien in every sense, different species, different status. He volunteered for her lab calls more often than necessary, telling himself it was just to ensure the fixes held. But her smiles, the way she listened as if his words were equations worth solving, chipped away at his resolve. He caught himself thinking of her during off shifts, wondering about Villani customs, imagining what it might be like to bridge the gap between their worlds. Still, he suppressed it, content with friendship, or so he convinced himself. One fateful day, the environmental system glitched again, a dramatic surge that sent alarms blaring and data streams flickering. Jake rushed in, toolkit in hand, finding Kes calmly rerouting power, her composure a stark contrast to the chaos. As he worked, she handed him the customary coffee, steaming and perfect. "You're a lifesaver, Kes," he said, taking a sip and sighing in contentment. "Keep this up, and I'm going to think you love me." It was a joke, light-hearted banter tossed out without thought, a remnant of earthly flirtation meant to elicit a chuckle. But the words hung in the air like charged particles, and Kes froze. Her cup clattered slightly as she set it down, her ears shooting straight up in unfiltered shock, the tips quivering. Her skin flushed through a spectrum of colors, deep crimson bleeding into violet, a Villani display of profound emotion she couldn't contain. Time seemed to dilate, the hum of the station fading to a distant roar. She turned to him, her amethyst eyes wide with vulnerability, and whispered, "How did you know?" The question pierced Jake like a laser beam, shattering his casual facade. He stared, coffee forgotten, as the implications dawned. This wasn't deflection or humor. It was raw honesty, her terrible poker face crumbling under the weight of hidden truth. "Kes, I was just kidding," he stammered, but the sincerity in her gaze told him otherwise. Her ears drooped slightly now, a sign of exposed fragility, and she averted her eyes, composing herself with visible effort. "I have been trying to conceal it for 3 months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with the dramatic tension of a confession long suppressed. "Your presence, it disrupts my equations. I did not intend for you to discover it this way." Jake's heart raced, a storm of emotions surging: surprise, flattery, and a reciprocal warmth he could no longer deny. In that moment, the space between them, once vast as the cosmos, contracted to something intimate and electric. As the alarm's echo faded, Jake set down his tools, stepping closer. "Kes, I had no idea. But if we're being honest, I've been feeling something too. I just thought it was impossible. You're this incredible scientist, and I'm just the guy who fixes things." Her ears perked again, this time with tentative hope, her skin settling into a soft, glowing azure. "Impossible? The universe is full of improbabilities that become realities," she replied, a dramatic flair in her words that made the moment feel like destiny unfolding. They stood there, amid the blinking consoles and stellar holograms, the weight of unspoken desires finally voiced. The joke had unraveled the threads of suppression, weaving them into the first strands of something profound. But as elation bloomed, so did the shadows of doubt cross species complexities, professional boundaries, cultural chasms. Yet in that charged silence, they chose to step forward, agreeing to explore this nascent bond with the care of scientists charting unknown stars. Over the following hours, as Jake completed the repair under Kess's watchful eye, they talked in hushed tones, laying bare the foundations of their feelings. Kess explained her Vellani heritage, where emotions were quantified and controlled, making her infatuation a rebellion against norms. Jake shared his earthly scars, the fear of vulnerability that had kept him distant. The conversation flowed like a river finding its course, dramatic in its revelations, romantic in its sincerity. By shift's end, they parted with a promise: a dinner in the station's observatory, where stars could witness their tentative beginning. Little did they know, this accidental confession was merely the ignition of a love that would challenge galaxies, drawing them into a vortex of passion, drama, and unbreakable connection. The observatory deck of the Orion Nexus was a cathedral of glass and starlight, its domed ceiling a flawless transparency that made the station feel less like metal and machinery and more like a vessel adrift in the endless sea of the cosmos. Tonight, the lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, leaving only the constellations outside to illuminate the intimate space Jake and Kess had chosen for their first deliberate step beyond friendship. A small table stood near the center, set with simple elegance, 2 plates of synthesized delicacies, blending Earth and Vellani cuisine, a bottle of deep ruby wine from the station's hydroponic vineyards, and candles that flickered with artificial flame, yet carried the warmth of real intention. Jake had arrived early, nerves humming beneath his calm exterior, adjusting his civilian tunic, a rare departure from his work jumpsuit, while staring out at the swirling nebulae that painted the void in strokes of violet and gold. When Kess entered, the sight of her stole the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She wore a flowing garment of liquid silver fabric that caught the starlight and reflected it in gentle waves across her iridescent skin. The dress clung and flowed in equal measure, accentuating the graceful lines of her form, while leaving her long, expressive ears unobscured. They were already flushed a delicate rose at the tips, betraying the storm of anticipation within her. Her amethyst eyes found his immediately, and for a heartbeat neither moved, as though the gravity of the moment had increased tenfold. Then she smiled, slow, radiant, vulnerable, and the distance between them dissolved. "You look incredible," Jake said, stepping forward to take her hand. Her skin was cool and silken, yet he felt the subtle warmth pulsing beneath, the dual heartbeat of her species thrumming faster than usual. Kess dipped her head slightly, ears twitching in shy pleasure. "And you look like someone who has decided to risk the stars," she replied, her voice a soft melody laced with dramatic undertones. They sat, the table small enough that their knees brushed beneath it, sending tiny electric shocks through both of them. Conversation began tentatively, as though they feared shattering the fragile new reality they had stepped into. They spoke of safe things first, the repair that had sparked everything, the way the station's rhythm felt different now that secrets had been laid bare. But the undercurrent was undeniable. Every glance held weight. Every accidental touch lingered. Jake poured the wine, their fingers brushing as he handed her the glass. "To improbable equations becoming certainties," he toasted, echoing her earlier words. Kess's ears perked fully, shimmering faintly. "To the chaos that makes order beautiful," she answered, and they drank, eyes locked over the rim. As the meal progressed, the barriers fell away like shed exoskeletons. Kess spoke of the Lara Prime, the crystalline spires that sang in the wind, the rigid societal algorithms that matched partners based on genetic and intellectual synergy rather than feeling. "Love, as humans define it, is considered a variable too volatile for stable unions," she confessed. "We are taught to suppress what cannot be quantified. Yet here I am, defying every lesson. Because the moment you said those words, 'You love me,' it felt like the universe itself had aligned to confirm what I already knew in silence." Her voice trembled at the edges, dramatic in its raw honesty, and Jake reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "I've spent years running from anything that felt this real," he admitted. "After Earth, after she left, I told myself attachments were just gravity wells waiting to pull you in and crush you. But you," he paused, searching for words that could match the enormity of what he felt. "You make me want to fall. Not out of recklessness, but because the landing might be worth everything." Kessa's skin shifted through hues of deepening indigo, a Vellani sign of profound emotion cresting like a wave. She turned her palm upward, lacing her fingers through his. "Then fall with me," she whispered. "Let us rewrite the rules together." The observatory's ambient music, a gentle fusion of human strings and Vellani harmonic resonances, swelled softly as they rose. Jake led her to the wide viewing ledge where the stars seemed close enough to touch. They stood side by side, shoulders brushing, watching a distant supernova bloom in slow, majestic silence. Kess leaned into him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "On Velara, we do not have this," she murmured. "Physical closeness outside of sanctioned pairings is discouraged. Yet it feels like the most natural thing in existence." Jake wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her closer. Her body fit against his as though designed for it, curves and angles aligning in perfect harmony. He pressed a tentative kiss to her temple, right where the delicate point of her ear met smooth skin. Kess shivered, a soft sound escaping her, a trill of pure delight that vibrated through them both. Time blurred. They talked of dreams and fears, of futures neither had dared imagine before tonight. Jake confessed his childhood fascination with the stars, how he had once lain on rooftops dreaming of touching them. Kess shared memories of sneaking away from lectures to watch meteor showers, feeling the first forbidden stirrings of wonder that refused to be catalogued. Each revelation drew them closer, until words became secondary to touch fingers tracing patterns on forearms, foreheads resting together, breaths mingling in the cool, recycled air. Then came the moment that would etch itself into their shared history like a new constellation. Kess turned fully into his embrace, tilting her face up to his. Her eyes shimmered with starlight and unshed tears of overwhelming feeling. "Jake," she breathed, the sound of his name on her lips carrying the weight of a vow. "I have calculated 1,000 scenarios, modeled every possible outcome. None prepared me for this certainty that I want all of you, every unpredictable, beautifully human part." Before he could respond, she rose on her toes and kissed him. The kiss was tentative first, exploratory, two worlds meeting for the first time. Her lips were softer than he'd imagined, tasting faintly of starfruit wine, and something uniquely her cool ozone and warm sunlight. Jake cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing the sensitive bases of her ears. Kess gasped softly against his mouth, ears flaring wide in a display of unguarded ecstasy, and the kiss deepened. It became hungry, desperate, as though all the months of restraint had coalesced into this single point of contact. Her hands slid up his chest, fingers curling into fabric, pulling him closer as if afraid he might vanish into the void. Jake responded with equal fervor, one hand tangling in the silken strands of her hair, while the other pressed against the small of her back, anchoring her to him. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Kess's skin glowed with a soft luminescence, a rare Vellani response to intense romantic arousal. "I did not know a kiss could rewrite gravity," she whispered, half laughing, half dazed. Jake chuckled, the sound rough with emotion. "It just did. And I'm never going back to 0G without you." They remained entwined, swaying gently to music only they could hear, until the station's chronometer chimed the late hour. Reluctantly, they drew apart, though their hands stayed linked. Jake walked her to the corridor leading to her quarters, pausing at the threshold. "Tomorrow?" he asked, voice low and hopeful. Kess squeezed his hand, ears curling forward in unmistakable affection. "Tomorrow and every day after, if you will have me." She rose once more, brushing a final lingering kiss across his lips before stepping inside. Jake stood in the corridor long after the door hissed shut, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt newly calibrated. The stars outside the nearest viewport seemed brighter, closer, as though approving of the reckless, beautiful thing they had begun. But beneath the euphoria lay the first faint shadows, whispers of protocol violations, species compatibility concerns, the inevitable scrutiny of colleagues and superiors. Yet tonight, those shadows were distant, overpowered by the radiant truth. Love, improbable and defiant, had claimed them both. Back in his own quarters, Jake lay awake, replaying every moment, the flush of her ears, the taste of her kiss, the way her heartbeat had thundered against his chest. Across the station, in her softly lit room, Kes touched her lips with trembling fingers, replaying the same scenes, her mind already racing toward the next equation. How to protect this fragile, incandescent miracle from a universe that rarely permitted such beautiful anomalies. Neither slept much that night. Instead, they dreamed in stereo of futures intertwined, of challenges yet to come, and of a love fierce enough to burn through every obstacle the stars could throw at them. The days following their observatory kiss unfolded like pages torn from a forbidden manuscript, beautiful, intoxicating, and increasingly perilous. Jake and Kes moved through the station with deliberate caution, their stolen moments hidden in maintenance alcoves, empty observation pods, and the quiet hours when most personnel slept in artificial night cycles. Yet every glance across a crowded corridor carried the voltage of their secret. Every brush of fingers when passing tools sparked memories of starlit embraces. The love that had ignited so dramatically now burned with steady, fierce intensity, but the universe, indifferent to romance, began to test its resilience. Kes's work on quantum-entangled communication arrays reached a critical phase. Her team, mostly Villani colleagues and a handful of human physicists, noticed subtle changes in her. Her legendary focus wavered for fractions of seconds when Jake's name appeared on repair logs. Her ears, usually disciplined, betrayed her with tiny, involuntary twitches whenever his voice crackled over comms. One afternoon in the central lab, while calibrating a prototype relay, her second-in-command, Dr. Vaylor, a stern Villani elder with silver-streaked skin and perpetually flattened ears, observed her staring at a diagnostic readout far longer than necessary. "Dr. Talon," Vaylor said sharply, "your attention appears divided. Is there an anomaly in the data or elsewhere?" Kes startled, ears snapping upright before she forced them back to neutral. "Merely recalibrating my own parameters, Doctor," she replied smoothly. But Vaylor's gaze lingered, analytical and cold. Villani society prized transparency in professional spheres. Emotional concealment was acceptable only when it served efficiency. Any hint of personal distraction was a flaw to be corrected or reported. Jake, meanwhile, faced his own scrutiny. His supervisor, Chief Engineer Ramirez, a gruff, no-nonsense woman who ran the maintenance division like a military outpost, called him into her office after noticing an unusual pattern in shift requests. "Morrison," she said without preamble, sliding a tablet across the desk, "you've volunteered for every single call to Lab 7A in the last 2 months. Care to explain why you're suddenly so invested in astrophysics equipment?" Jake kept his expression neutral. "The environmental systems in that sector have been glitchy. I know the layout best." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Glitchy enough to justify triple overtime? Or is there something or someone else keeping you there late?" The question hung heavy. Jake met her eyes steadily. "Just doing my job, Chief." She studied him a long moment before nodding curtly. "Keep it professional. Cross-species fraternization isn't expressly forbidden, but it draws eyes, and eyes mean paperwork. You don't want that headache." The warning landed like micrometeorite impacts, small, stinging, cumulative. That evening, in the dim privacy of an auxiliary generator room Jake had scheduled for inspection, he and Kes met in hurried, desperate reunion. She slipped inside, sealing the door behind her, and immediately pressed herself against him, hands framing his face as she kissed him with a hunger that bordered on panic. When they broke apart, both breathing raggedly, She rested her forehead against his. "They suspect," she whispered. Vaylor asked pointed questions today. "My performance metrics are still exemplary, but emotion is leaking through the cracks. I cannot recalibrate my heart rate when I hear your footsteps." Jake pulled her closer, arms encircling her waist. "Ramirez cornered me too. They're watching." He kissed the sensitive point of one ear, drawing a soft, involuntary trill from her. "We could stop," he said quietly, testing the words. "Slow down. Be more careful." Kes stiffened in his embrace. Her skin darkened to stormy indigo, a Vellani sign of fierce rejection. "Stop." She pulled back just enough to look at him, eyes blazing. "Jake, you are the only variable in my universe that has ever made chaos feel like home. If I stop now, I am not protecting us. I am erasing the only truth I have ever chosen for myself." Her voice cracked on the last word. Raw and dramatic, the scientist giving way entirely to the woman who loved beyond reason. He cupped her face, thumbs tracing the delicate ridges along her cheekbones. "Then we don't stop. We get smarter. We plan." They spent the next hour in fierce, whispered strategy alternate routes through service tunnels, encrypted personal comms routed through personal devices, fabricated reasons for their overlapping schedules. But beneath the practicality lay a growing undercurrent of fear, not of discovery itself, but of what discovery might cost. The crisis arrived without warning 3 days later. During a routine systems diagnostic, a cascading failure rippled through the station's primary power grid. Alarms shrieked. Emergency lighting bathed corridors in blood red. Jake was already en route to the central hub when Kes's urgent voice cut through his cum. "Jake, the entanglement array is destabilizing. If the power surge hits the core relays, we could lose containment on the micro-singularity chamber." Her tone was calm, professional, but he heard the terror beneath. Losing containment meant catastrophic implosion. The entire science wing, dozens of lives would be at risk. He sprinted through shaking corridors, bypassing jammed turbolifts by climbing access ladders. When he burst into Lab 7A, chaos reigned. Consoles sparked. Holographic displays flickered wildly. Kes stood at the master panel, hands flying across controls, ears pinned flat in absolute concentration. Vaylor and 2 other Vellani scientists worked frantically beside her. Jake didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need," he shouted over the alarms. Kes didn't look up. "Manual override on the tertiary coolant lines. Their locked-out safety protocol won't release under surge conditions. You'll have to bypass physically." He nodded, already moving to the access hatch. As he crawled into the narrow surface crawl space, sparks raining around him, Kes's voice followed over private cum. "Jake, be careful, please." The please carried everything unspoken. "I cannot lose you, not now, not ever." He gritted his teeth against the heat and confined terror. "I'm not going anywhere, Kes. Just keep that singularity from eating the station." Minutes stretched into eternity. Sweat stung his eyes. His hands bled from sharp metal edges. Finally, he reached the manual override levers, 3 massive locked bars designed never to be moved under live power. With a wrench and sheer willpower, he forced the first, then the second. The third resisted. Warning klaxons screamed proximity alerts. Containment breach in 30 seconds. Jake braced his shoulder, roared, and shoved with everything he had. The bar gave. Coolant flooded the lines. The alarms shifted, pitch failure averted. He emerged filthy, bleeding, exhausted. The lab was stabilizing. The red lights dimmed to amber. Kes turned from the console, saw him, and protocol be damned ran. She threw her arms around him, heedless of the watching eyes, heedless of soot and blood. "You're alive," she breathed against his neck, voice breaking. "You're alive." Jake held her tightly, feeling her dual hearts hammering against his chest. "Told you," he murmured. "Not going anywhere." But the embrace lasted only seconds before Vaylor's voice cut through like a blade. "Dr. Talon." "Technician Morrison." A word. They separated slowly. Vaylor stood rigid, ears flat, expression unreadable. Behind him, the other scientists exchanged glances. The evidence was undeniable. Emotion, physical contact, disregard for hierarchy in crisis. Vaylor spoke quietly, but every word carried the weight of judgment. Your collaboration saved the array. For that, gratitude is owed. But this, he gestured between them, cannot continue without formal review. Cross-species romantic entanglement violates no explicit regulation, yet it compromises objectivity. Reports will be filed. Disciplinary hearings may follow. Kes lifted her chin, ears rising defiantly. Then file them. I will not apologize for loving him. Jake stepped beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Neither will I. Vaylor regarded them for a long moment, something almost like reluctant respect flickering in his gaze. So be it. Prepare yourselves. The stars do not forgive sentimentality easily. As the lab slowly returned to normal function, Jake and Kes stood together amid the fading emergency lights. Their hands found each other, fingers entwining. The crisis had stripped away pretense. Their love was no longer a secret to be guarded, but a truth to be defended. Yet the shadow of impending hearings loomed, promising scrutiny, possible reassignment, maybe even separation across light years. That night, in the safety of Jake's quarters, riskier now, but necessary, they clung to one another with desperate tenderness. Kes traced the cuts on his hands, healing salve glowing faintly on her fingertips. I would choose this danger 1,000 times over safety without you, she whispered. Jake kissed her slowly, deeply, tasting salt and starlight. Then we fight for it, together. Outside their window, a nebula burned in silent splendor, beautiful, violent, eternal. Like their love, it refused easy categorization. And like their love, it would either illuminate the darkness or consume them both. The disciplinary hearing arrived like a slow supernova, inevitable, brilliant, and devastating in its slow burn. The Orion Nexus's central conference chamber had been reconfigured, stark white walls now lined with holographic panels displaying station protocols, cross-species interaction clauses, and psychological compatibility matrices. At the head of the long obsidian table sat the review board 3 humans. 2 Villani, 1 neutral AI arbitrator whose voice carried no inflection and therefore carried every possible judgment. Jake and Kes sat side by side, not touching, but close enough that the heat between them felt like its own gravitational field. Dr. Vaylor presented the case with clinical precision. Security footage flickered across the panels. The desperate embrace in Lab 7A after the near catastrophe. Jake's soot-streaked face buried in Kes's hair, her ears flared wide in unguarded relief. Testimonies followed, colleagues noting emotional leakage in Kes's work. Ramirez confirming Jake's pattern of overtime in Sector 7. The board listened without interruption. When it was their turn, Kes rose first. I will not defend love as though it requires defense, she began, voice steady yet resonant with the dramatic timbre only Villani could achieve when emotion finally overrode logic. I have spent my life measuring the unmeasurable dark energy, event horizons, probabilities smaller than atoms. Yet the moment technician Morrison spoke those careless, beautiful words, I understood something no equation has ever captured: certainty without proof. I love him. Not because compatibility matrices approve, not because cultural precedent exists, but because every chamber of my heart beats truer in his presence. If that compromises objectivity, then objectivity was never the highest value. Jake followed, simpler, rawer. I'm not a scientist. I fix things. But Kes, she fixed something in me I didn't know was broken. After Earth, I swore off anything that could hurt like that again. Then she smiled at me over bad coffee, and suddenly the stars didn't feel so cold. We didn't plan this. We didn't game the system. We just happened. And if happening to love someone across species lines is a violation, then maybe the rules need rewriting. The board recessed for deliberation. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Jake and Kes waited in an adjacent lounge, finally alone, She leaned against him. He wrapped both arms around her without hesitation. "Whatever they decide," he murmured into her hair, "I'm not letting go. If they separate us, I'll find a way to follow. Cargo ship, escape pod, walk the damn void, I'll find you." Kes tilted her face up, eyes shimmering. "And if they allow us to stay, I will spend every remaining orbit proving we were worth the exception." They kissed then, not desperate, not stolen, but slow and deliberate, the kind of kiss that carries the promise of decades rather than moments. When the board reconvened, the AI arbitrator spoke first. After review of precedent, performance records, and the unique circumstances of the recent containment incident, the panel has reached a determination. A pause that lasted forever. Regulation 17.4 prohibits relationships that demonstrably impair professional function. Evidence shows no impairment indeed. The subject's collaboration during crisis enhanced outcome. Therefore, no disciplinary action will be taken at this time. Relief crashed over them like a wave. But the chief human board member, Captain Alina Vos, leaned forward. "However, continued assignment on the same station carries risk of perceived bias. Dr. Talon, your entanglement array research has drawn interest from the Core World Science Consortium. They have requested your transfer to their primary facility on Epsilon INDB effective in 30 days. Technician Morrison, your skills are valuable here, but we are prepared to approve a voluntary reassignment request should you wish to accompany her." The room went still. Transfer, not punishment opportunity. A new world, new lab, new life. Together. Kes's ears rose slowly, trembling. Jake felt her dual hearts stutter against his side. "We accept," she said before either could overthink it. "Both of us." 30 days later, the departure shuttle waited in Bay 12, engines already warming. The station had thrown them an unofficial farewell quiet, heartfelt, a handful of colleagues who had quietly rooted for them all along. Ramirez even cracked a rare smile and pressed a small data chip into Jake's hand. "Updated maintenance schematics for INDB's outpost. Don't screw it up, Morrison." Vaylor approached last, ears held in formal neutrality. To Kes he said only, "You have chosen a variable no model could predict. May it remain stable." To Jake, a simple nod. The closest a Villani elder came to blessing. They boarded together, hands clasped openly now. The shuttle lifted away from the Orion Nexus, turning toward the jump point. Through the viewport, the station shrank until it was just another light among billions. Kes rested her head on Jake's shoulder. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. He turned, cupped her face with both hands. "Regret the only thing that ever made sense. Never." Then he kissed her deeply, unhurried, the kiss of people who finally had time. The journey to Epsilon INDB took 11 days in hyperspace. They spent them building the small routines that would become the foundation of everything. Morning coffee, still black, 2 sugars. Late night talks about nothing and everything. Quiet moments where they simply held each other and listened to the hum of the ship. Kes taught him fragments of Villani songs haunting, multi-tonal melodies that made the steel walls feel alive. Jake taught her Earth constellations, tracing them on her shimmering skin with his fingertip until she laughed and pulled him down for more. When they emerged from hyperspace, Epsilon INDB filled the viewport, a turquoise and silver world wrapped in gossamer rings, its primary research dome already visible as a tiny glittering jewel on the night side. The shuttle descended through lambent clouds, touching down on a landing pad surrounded by crystalline spires that sang softly in the wind, just as Kes had once described her homeworld. They stepped out together into alien air that smelled of ozone and blooming night flowers. The welcoming committee was small, a handful of scientists, a few human engineers, all smiling. No suspicion, no protocols to recite. Just welcome. That first night, after the formalities, they were given quarters overlooking the rings. The bedroom wall was one vast window. Above them, the rings arched like a halo of frozen starlight. Kes stood at the glass, ears perked, skin glowing softly with reflected light. Jake came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist. "Look," she whispered. "The universe gave us its own cathedral." He pressed a kiss to the sensitive base of one ear, drawing a shiver and a delighted trill. "And we're going to fill it with every messy, beautiful thing we are." She turned in his arms, rising to meet his mouth. The kiss began gentle, reverent, then deepened into something fiercer, hungrier, as though all the restraint of months and light years finally shattered. Clothes fell away like unnecessary gravity. They moved to the bed in a tangle of limbs and laughter, and whispered names. When he entered her, slow and careful, her eyes widened in wonder. Her skin flared through every color of love she had ever suppressed. Their bodies found rhythm, human urgency meeting Villani harmony, until pleasure crested like a supernova, leaving them trembling, breathless, entwined. Afterward, they lay watching the rings turn above them. Kes traced idle patterns on his chest. "I once thought love was inefficiency," she murmured. "Now I see it as the only force strong enough to bend light." Jake kissed her forehead. "And we bent it together." Years would pass on Epsilon Indi B. They would publish groundbreaking papers, raise hybrid children who inherited both human stubbornness and Villani wonder, grow old surrounded by students who whispered their story like legend. But that first night, under alien rings, was the truest ending and the truest beginning. Because love improbable, defiant, cross-species, rule-breaking love had not merely survived the stars, it had renamed them. And the stars, remembering, shone a little brighter.
Cabrón. ¿Cómo andas, mi Heriberto Carrera? ¿Cómo estás? Arigato gozaimasu. Hace muchísimo calor, bandita. Hace muchísimo calor, güey.